Friends, today it's August 8, 2023, and I'm just on the outskirts of Krakow. What you see here before me is a beautiful landscape, and in fact, if you look further to where the trees are, the tree line, as it were, there's a very large meadow over there. This is a very bucolic landscape over here, but you'll be surprised to know that it's the site of a former Nazi concentration camp. And what is all the more remarkable is that this concentration camp is really just on the outskirts of Krakow. I shouldn't even say on the outskirts, it's within the city, it's just on the other side of the river. So if you go further north and cross the river, you get into eventually what is Old Town Krakow, and this is on the southern side of the city. And this camp here is but one of hundreds of camps which form part of the universe of camps. There's a whole lot of literature, which I won't get into at the moment, on the distinction between a concentration camp, a labor camp, and a death camp or an extermination camp. There were in fact only really 6 extermination camps as such. The most notorious of them, of course, being Auschwitz. And Auschwitz was never just only an extermination camp, unlike the other extermination or death camps, which were set up explicitly for the purpose of extermination of mainly Jews, but also Poles and homosexuals and the Roma and the Sinti and political dissidents. Auschwitz became a killing center later on, but that's a different subject. What is interesting about this camp here, which is pronounced, as far as I know, as Puszczał or Plaszczał, that's the Polish word. This camp is a camp that no one told me about when I came to this city, and in fact I'd spoken with a number of people who work with the Holocaust. And of course everyone mentioned Auschwitz, and Krakow is the point from which people take a trip generally to Auschwitz, and it's understandable that Auschwitz should hog the imagination because 1.1 million people were killed there. This particular camp housed about 20,000 people. That was the maximum number of people it housed at any point in time, which is still very large. According to the historical authorities, perhaps as many as 10,000 people were killed here. The plaque mentions 5,000, the plaque which is the entrance to the camp. And in fact, there's plaques that have been set up. There's one there in the distance there, which zooming in, you can see that white spot there. That's one of the small plaques, number 12. They're trying to preserve this as something of a kind of a historical site, and roughly about 300 meters from here is what is called the Grey House. The Grey House is the only building standing from that period, and it's the building that housed the office of the commandant of the camp. But here you see the back of a monument which has been built to the victims of this camp, and the front towards which I'm going to now walk is really quite arresting. But I want to say something else, which is that one of the ways in which we think about camps, in fact I'd say it's the predominant way that we think about camps, and I think this is true of the historical literature as well, is to think of them as labor camps or extermination camps or concentration camps. And of course people think of Auschwitz or they think of Treblinka. Treblinka was one of these 6 extermination camps. Or they think of Kulmhof, which is a German name. In Polish, it's known as Helmno. Or they think of Majdanek, which is associated with the city of Lublin to the east, the southeast, I think, of Warsaw. But I would rather think also of the landscapes of these camps. A surprising number of camps, surprising number indeed of these camps were associated with forests, with rivers. And I think particularly thinking of camps in association with forests is instructive. Here you see Krakow built all around, modern Krakow built all around the site of this former camp. And as I said earlier, no one speaks about it at all. There have been a few visitors here, perhaps a half a dozen or so in the last half an hour that I've been here. But it is really a camp that is forgotten. And that is true, of course, of the hundreds of camps that constituted the Nazi camp universe. And there's really no other phrase for it except that it was a camp universe, because there were literally 1,000 camps. And a major camp such as Treblinka, a death camp such as Treblinka or Auschwitz would have had a large number of sub-camps associated with them. And here is the monument to this, to the victims of this camp. As I'm trying to suggest, I think it's really remarkable that this camp stood really today. Perhaps we can even think of it as being in the center of the city. I don't know what Krakow looked like in late 1930s, early 1940s. And when people sometimes submit that they weren't in the know, that people weren't in the know about what was happening, it seems all the more implausible when you consider the proximity of this camp to the city of Krakow. Auschwitz is a good 60, 70, 80 kilometers away. The same can be said of Treblinka in relationship to Warsaw. And when you go to Kulmhof, which I went to, it's really in the middle of nowhere. It's between Łódź and Poznan, and there one can see that the camp was set up in the midst of a forest. And so perhaps someone might be inclined to argue that, well, you know, the Nazis were trying to cover their tracks and all of that, but they weren't trying to cover their tracks over here, right? So this camp raises a lot of interesting questions. It's a much smaller camp in relationship to, of course, Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz, Sobibor, Belzec. Those were the extermination camps. But nevertheless, this camp has its history, and this camp has its victims.